When waitress Elena Moore collides, literally with billionaire Sebastian Knight, their worlds couldn't be more different. But as their lives intertwine, will love be enough to bridge the gap? Or will their differences tear them apart before we get into the story? Comment below where in the world you're watching from today. The rain pounded against the windshield of Elena Moore's ancient Honda as she squinted to see through the blur. She was already late for her second job, and her boss at the diner wouldn't be happy. 3 late arrivals meant a warning, and she couldn't afford to lose this job, not with her father's medical bills piling up. "Come on," she muttered, tapping the steering wheel nervously. The traffic light seemed to stay red forever. When it finally turned green, she pressed the gas pedal. Too quickly. The tires spun on the wet asphalt before gaining traction. That's when it happened. As she turned the corner, her car slid slightly. Elena tried to correct it, but it was too late. The sickening sound of metal crunching against metal filled her ears as her bumper, connected with the sleek black car, stopped at the intersection. "No, no, no," she whispered, her heart sinking to her stomach. Elena pulled over to the side of the road, her hands shaking as she turned off the ignition. Through her rearview mirror, she could see the other driver getting out. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in what looked like a suit that probably cost more than her rent. She forced herself to exit her car, the rain immediately drenching her uniform. "I'm so sorry," she called out, approaching the man who was now inspecting the damage to his vehicle. It wasn't just any car. It was a Maserati, brand new from the looks of it. When he turned to face her, Elena felt like the ground might swallow her whole. She recognized him immediately from the business magazines at the doctor's office where she worked mornings. Sebastian Knight, the billionaire tech mogul who'd made his fortune before turning 30. "I don't have time for this," he said. His voice clipped as he ran a hand through his dark hair, now getting wet in the rain. "I'm really sorry," Elena repeated, water dripping down her face. "I have insurance, but—" She didn't finish the sentence. Her insurance had a high deductible, and even that would strain her finances to the breaking point. Sebastian Knight studied her for a moment, taking in her soaked diner uniform, the dark circles under her eyes, and the way she was nervously twisting. A simple silver ring on her finger. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Buy me a coffee and we'll call it even," he said suddenly. Elena blinked. "What?" "There's a cafe across the street. Buy me a coffee and we'll forget about this." He gestured to the dent in his car's rear panel. "But the damage," Elena stammered, confused by his offer. Sebastian shrugged. "It's just a car." 10 minutes later, they sat across from each other in a small cafe. Elena couldn't believe she was sitting across from Sebastian Knight, buying him a $4 coffee to settle what must have been thousands in damage. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked after the waiter brought their drinks. Sebastian took a sip of his espresso before answering. "You looked like you were having a worse day than I was." "That doesn't seem like the kind of decision that made you a billionaire," Elena said before she could stop herself. To her surprise, Sebastian laughed. "You know who I am. Anyone who's ever stood in a grocery checkout line knows who you are. And you're not impressed," he observed, leaning back in his chair. Elena shrugged. "Should I be?" Money doesn't automatically make someone impressive. Something sparked in Sebastian's grey eyes. "What's your name?" "Elena. Elena Moore." "So, Elena Moore, you're working 2 jobs?" he asked, nodding at her uniform. "This morning I'm a receptionist at a medical clinic. Afternoons and evenings I wait tables." She glanced at her watch. "And I'm going to be very late." "I can call your boss," Sebastian offered. Elena shook her head firmly. "No thanks, I don't need special favors." Sebastian studied her with interest. Most people he met wanted something from him. Money, connections, status. This woman who had crashed into his car seemed only to want to get away from him. "At least let me drive you there," he said. "In your dented Maserati." Elena gave a small smile. "I have." "Others?" Elena rolled her eyes. "Of course you do." Against her better judgment, Elena found herself in the passenger seat of Sebastian Knight's car 5 minutes later. The rich leather interior smelled new, and she felt out of place in her damp uniform. "The Golden Spoon Diner on Maple Street," she directed him. As they drove, Elena noticed Sebastian glancing at her. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. It's just, you're not what I expected when I got out of my car today. A disaster who can't afford to fix your car?" Sebastian's mouth twitched. "A honest person. Those are rare in my world." They pulled up in front of the diner and Elena reached for the door handle. "Thank you for the ride, and for not suing me. Have dinner with me tonight," Sebastian said. Abruptly, Elena stared at him. "You're joking." "I'm not." "Why would you want to have dinner with me? I just crashed into your car." "Maybe that's exactly why," Sebastian replied with a smile that transformed his serious face. "You're the first interesting thing that's happened to me all week." Elena shook her head. "I work until 11. I'll pick you up at 11 then. Mr. Knight?" "Sebastian." "Sebastian," Elena corrected. "People like you don't date people like me. Let me decide what kind of people I date." He took out a business card and wrote something on the back. "My personal number. Text me if you change. Your mind." Elena took the card, still in disbelief. "I won't." "We'll see," Sebastian said with a confidence that both annoyed and intrigued her. Inside the diner, Elena's boss Lucy was not pleased. "20 minutes late, Elena. I was about to call Mandy to cover your shift." "I'm sorry, Lucy. I had a car accident." Lucy's anger faded. "Are you okay? Is your car drivable?" "I'm fine, and yes, my car will survive." Elena tied on her apron and grabbed her order pad. "Who was that dropping you off?" Lucy asked, peering through the window. "That car costs more than this entire diner." "Just someone who witnessed the accident," Elena lied. She wasn't ready to explain her bizarre encounter with Sebastian Knight. As the evening progressed, Elena couldn't stop thinking about Sebastian's dinner invitation. Why would a billionaire be interested in someone like her? It had to be some kind of joke, or worse, something more predatory. Men with money and power usually wanted one thing from women like her. At 8 o'clock, the diner door opened and Elena nearly dropped her coffee pot. Sebastian Knight walked in, now dressed in dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt that somehow looked expensive despite its simplicity. "What are you doing here?" she hissed as he sat in her section. "Having dinner," he replied innocently. "This is a diner, right?" Elena glanced around, noticing how other patrons were starting to stare. "You can't be here." "Why not?" "Because..." Elena struggled to find a reasonable explanation. "Because people like you eat at five-star restaurants, not diners with sticky menus." Sebastian picked up a menu. "I like comfort food. What's good here?" Elena sighed, realizing he wasn't going to leave. "The meatloaf is decent. The apple pie is actually great. I'll have both then." He smiled at her and Elena felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. As she served other customers, Elena was acutely aware of Sebastian watching her. Not in a creepy way, but with genuine interest, as if trying to solve a puzzle. When she brought his food, he asked, "Tell me about yourself, Elena Moore." "There's not much to tell," she replied, refilling his water glass. "And I have other tables." "I'll wait." True to his word, Sebastian lingered over his meal, occasionally making notes on his phone. When the diner emptied around 10, he was still there nursing a cup of coffee. Lucy approached Elena at the counter. "Who is that man? He's been here for hours." "Just a customer," Elena said. "He looks familiar." Lucy narrowed her eyes. "Wait a minute, is that Sebastian Knight, the Sebastian Knight?" "Shh!" Elena hushed her. "Please don't make a scene." "What's he doing in my diner?" Lucy whispered excitedly, eating meatloaf apparently. When Elena brought Sebastian his check, he finally caught her in conversation. "So, about that dinner." "This wasn't dinner?" Elena gestured to his empty plate. "This was research," Sebastian corrected. "The meatloaf was good, by the way. The pie was excellent." "Research for what?" "For our actual dinner. Now I know you have good taste." Elena shook her head. "I already told you I'm not going to dinner with you." "Why not?" "Because we're from different worlds. Because this doesn't make sense. Because tomorrow you'll regret asking the waitress from the diner on a date." Sebastian leaned forward. "I never regret my decisions, Elena. And I'm very interested in seeing what happens when our different worlds collide." Before Elena could respond, the door to the diner burst open. A disheveled man in his 60s stumbled in, looking around frantically until he spotted Elena. "Dad!" Elena rushed over to him. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at home resting." "You weren't answering your phone," her father said, his voice slurred slightly from his medication. "I got worried after the accident. Mrs. Jenkins next door told me you called about the car." "I'm fine, Dad. Everything's fine." Elena put her arm around him, guiding him to a seat. "Let me get you some water." Sebastian watched the interaction with interest, noting the concern in Elena's eyes and the protective way she tended to her father. When she returned to his table, her cheeks were flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry about that. My dad has heart problems and he worries." "No need to apologize," Sebastian said. "Family is important." Elena nodded, surprised by his understanding. "I need to get him home. My shift is almost over anyway." "Let me drive you both," Sebastian offered. Elena started to refuse, but then looked at her father, who seemed more tired than usual. "Okay, thank you." 20 minutes later, Sebastian's car pulled up to a small apartment building in a working-class neighborhood. He insisted on helping Elena get her father inside, carrying the older man's meager grocery bags. "Nice place," Sebastian said once they had settled her father in his recliner. Elena gave him a look. "No, it's not, but it's what we can afford." Sebastian wandered to the family photos on the wall. Elena graduating from high school, her father in a factory uniform, a woman who must have been her mother. "She passed away 5 years ago," Elena said, noticing where his gaze had landed. "Cancer. That's when Dad's heart problems started getting worse." Sebastian turned to her. "You've been taking care of him since then?" Elena nodded. "He took care of me my whole life. It's my turn now." For a moment, Sebastian was silent, taking in this woman who worked 2 jobs, cared for her sick father, and still had the spirit to stand up to him. In his world of yes men and gold diggers, she was refreshingly real. "Have coffee with me tomorrow," he said, changing tactics. "Not dinner, just coffee." Elena looked at him, fatigue evident in her eyes. "Why are you so persistent?" "Because I know what I want when I see it," Sebastian answered simply. "And what is it you want, Sebastian Knight?" "To get to know the woman who wasn't impressed by my car or my money. The woman who values family over everything else." He stepped closer. "The woman who crashed into my life today and made me feel something I haven't felt in a long time." "And what's that?" Elena asked softly. "Curiosity." Sebastian's grey eyes held hers. "So, coffee? Tomorrow afternoon?" Against every rational thought, Elena found herself nodding. "One coffee, that's it." Sebastian smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "That's all I'm asking for now." As he left her apartment, Elena wondered what she was getting herself into. People like Sebastian Knight didn't just appear in lives like hers without a reason. But as she watched his expensive car drive away from her window, she couldn't help the small thrill of anticipation that ran through her. Tomorrow would bring just one coffee. But somehow, Elena knew her life had already changed course, just like her car had on that rainy afternoon. Elena woke up the next morning, wondering if she had dreamed the previous day's events. Had she really crashed into Sebastian Knight's car? Had he really asked her out for coffee? The business card on her nightstand confirmed it wasn't a dream. She picked it up, running her thumb over the embossed letters. Sebastian Knight, CEO, Knight Innovations. On the back was his handwritten cell phone number. Elena still couldn't make sense of why a billionaire would be interested in her, but she had agreed to coffee, and she wasn't one to break her word. After her morning shift at the clinic, Elena checked on her father before heading to meet Sebastian. "You look nice," her father commented, as she changed out of her work clothes into her best jeans and a simple blue blouse. "I'm just meeting someone for coffee," Elena said, trying to sound casual. Her father raised an eyebrow. "A man?" "Yes, Dad. A man." "Anyone I know?" Elena hesitated. "No. He's actually the guy whose car I hit yesterday." Her father's eyes widened. "And he's taking you for coffee instead of making you pay for damages. Either he's the most generous man in the world or what?" Elena prompted. Her father smiled. "Or he thinks my daughter is something special," which she is, Elena kissed his forehead. "I'll be back in a couple of hours. Mrs. Jenkins is right next door if you need anything." "Stop worrying about me and have fun for once," her father said, waving her off. The cafe Sebastian had suggested was in an upscale part of town where Elena rarely ventured. She felt out of place as she approached the entrance, noticing the expensive cars parked outside and the well-dressed patrons inside. Sebastian was already there, sitting at a corner table, focused on his laptop. Unlike yesterday, today he was dressed in a full business suit that probably cost more than her car. Several people in the cafe were sneaking glances at him, recognizing the famous entrepreneur. When he saw Elena, Sebastian's serious expression transformed into a warm smile. He stood up as she approached, closing his laptop. "I was starting to think you might not come," he said. "I said I would," Elena replied, sitting down across from him. "I keep my promises." A rare quality these days. Sebastian signaled the waiter. "What would you like?" "Just regular coffee is fine." Once they had ordered a simple coffee for Elena and an espresso for Sebastian, an awkward silence fell between them. "So," Elena said finally, "this is weird, right?" Sebastian laughed and the tension broke. "Completely weird," he agreed. "But sometimes weird is good." "Is it?" Elena asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like the beginning of a cautionary tale my friends would tell me to avoid." "What kind of cautionary tale?" "The kind where the rich guy slums it with the working-class girl for a while before going back to his real life." Sebastian's expression grew serious. "Is that what you think is happening here?" Elena shrugged. "I don't know what's happening here. That's why I came, to figure it out." The waiter brought their coffees and Sebastian took a moment before responding. "I've been thinking about why I asked you here," he said finally. "And it's not because I'm bored or looking for some kind of thrill." "Then why?" "Because you're real." Sebastian leaned forward. "Do you know how rare that is in my world? Everyone wants something from me. Investors want returns, employees want promotions, women want status or money or both. And I don't want anything from you?" Elena asked skeptically. "Exactly. Xiao didn't even want my help when I offered to call your boss or drive you home." Elena stirred her coffee. "That's not being real. That's just having pride." "Maybe," Sebastian conceded. But it was refreshing either way. As they talked, Elena learned that Sebastian had built his company from the ground up, starting with a small tech idea in college that grew into a business empire. Despite his wealth, he worked long hours and seemed genuinely passionate about innovation. "Enough about me," Sebastian said after a while. "Tell me about you. What do you want, Elena Moore?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "Dreams. Ambitions. What would you do if you didn't have to work 2 jobs to survive?" Elena thought for a moment. "I'd go back to school. I was studying nursing before my mom got sick. I had to drop out to help with the medical bills and take care of her." "Why nursing?" "I like helping people, making a difference in their lives when they're at their most vulnerable." She smiled. "Not very glamorous, I know." "On the contrary," Sebastian said, "it's admirable." Their coffee stretched into a second cup, and Elena was surprised by how easy it was to talk to Sebastian once she got past her initial reservations. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and a good listener, qualities she hadn't expected from someone with his reputation. As they were finishing, Sebastian's phone buzzed repeatedly. He glanced at it with a frown. "Problem?" Elena asked. "Nothing I can't handle," he replied, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Just work." "You should go," Elena said. "I've taken up enough of your time." Sebastian hesitated. "I'd rather stay." "The world of business doesn't stop turning because Sebastian Knight is having coffee," Elena teased. He smiled reluctantly. "True, but I'd like to see you again." "Why?" The question came out before Elena could stop it. "Because for the first time in months, I've enjoyed a conversation that wasn't about profit margins or market strategies." Sebastian reached across the table and took her hand, sending an unexpected thrill through her. "Have dinner with me tonight, a real dinner this time, not meatloaf at the diner." Elena felt herself wavering. "I don't know." "Just dinner," Sebastian insisted. "I'll pick." "You up at 7. Against her better judgment, Elena found herself agreeing. When Sebastian's car pulled up outside her apartment building that evening, several neighbors peered curiously through their windows. Elena hurried outside before anyone could ask questions. Sebastian took her to a small, elegant restaurant where the maitre d' greeted him by name. They were shown to a private corner table away from prying eyes. "You come here often?" Elena asked as they were seated. "It's one of the few places in the city where I can eat without ending up in someone's social media post," Sebastian explained. Elena looked down at her simple black dress, the nicest thing she owned, and felt underdressed despite Sebastian's assurance that she looked beautiful. "Relax," he said, noticing her discomfort. "The food is the star here, not the dress code." As they enjoyed their meal, Elena found herself opening up more about her life, her childhood dreams, the struggles after her mother's death, her hopes for her father's health to improve. "He was a factory worker his whole life," she explained. "The machinery damaged his hearing, and the stress took a toll on his heart, but he never complained, not once." "He raised an impressive daughter," Sebastian observed. Elena blushed at the compliment. "What about your family?" she asked, changing the subject. A shadow crossed Sebastian's face. "Not much to tell. My parents divorced when I was young. My father was demanding. Success was the only option in our house." "Is that why you work so hard now?" Sebastian considered the question. "Partly, but also because I genuinely love what I do, creating technology that changes people's lives. There's nothing like it. Except maybe saving those lives," Elena countered. Sebastian raised his glass to her. "Touché." As the evening progressed, Elena felt herself being drawn to Sebastian in a way that both excited and frightened her. He was unlike anyone she'd ever met, confident without being arrogant, intelligent without being condescending. After dinner, Sebastian suggested a walk along the waterfront. The night was clear, the city lights reflecting on the water. "I have a confession to make," Sebastian said as they strolled side by side. "What's that?" Elena asked, suddenly wary. "I looked you up after our accident." Elena stopped walking. "You what?" "I was curious," Sebastian explained. "It's a habit in business, knowing who you're dealing with." "So I'm business now?" Elena felt her defenses rising again. "No, that's not what I meant." Sebastian ran a hand through his hair. I wanted to know more about you." "And what did you find out in your investigation?" Elena crossed her arms. "That you graduated top of your class in high school. That you were on a nursing scholarship at State before you had to drop out. That you volunteer at the community center on your rare days off." Sebastian's eyes held hers. "That you're exactly who you appear to be." Elena didn't know whether to be flattered or furious. "You could have just asked me those things. Would you have told me?" Sebastian challenged. She considered this. "Maybe not all at once." "That's my point." "I'm impatient, Elena. When I want to know something, I find out." "And when you want something?" she asked quietly. Sebastian stepped closer. "I pursue it, relentlessly." The intensity in his eyes made Elena's heart race. She knew she should be cautious, that getting involved with someone like Sebastian Knight was asking for heartbreak. But in that moment, with the city, lights around them and his gaze fixed on her, caution seemed overrated. "I should get home," she said finally, breaking the tension. "I have an early shift tomorrow." Sebastian nodded, respecting her boundaries. "I'll drive you." On the way back to her apartment, Sebastian asked, "Would you consider taking a day off tomorrow?" Elena laughed. "Some of us can't afford spontaneous days off, Sebastian." "What if I spoke to your bosses?" "Absolutely not," Elena said firmly. "I don't want special treatment because of whatever this is," Sebastian smiled. "I admire your independence. It's refreshing." "You keep using that word, because it's true. You're unlike anyone I've ever met, Elena Moore." When they reached her building, Sebastian walked her to the door. In the dim light of the hallway, he looked even more handsome, his grey eyes intense as they studied her face. "Thank you for dinner," Elena said, suddenly nervous. "Thank you for your company," Sebastian replied. He hesitated, then leaned in slowly. Giving her time to pull away, Elena knew she should. This was moving too fast, was too complicated, too fraught with potential for disaster. But instead she found herself meeting him halfway, their lips connecting in a gentle but electrifying kiss. When they parted, Sebastian cupped her face with his hand. "I'd like to see you again, soon." "This is crazy," Elena whispered. "The best things usually are," Sebastian replied. Inside her apartment, Elena found her father still awake, pretending to watch TV but obviously waiting up for her. "How was coffee?" he asked innocently. "It turned into dinner," Elena admitted. Her father studied her flushed cheeks and bright eyes. "This man must be something special. He's—" Elena struggled to find the right words. "Different. Complicated. The good ones usually are," her father said, echoing Sebastian's sentiment without knowing it. The next morning, Elena arrived at the clinic to find a massive bouquet of flowers waiting at the reception desk. "Secret admirer?" asked Dr. Williams, the clinic director, with a knowing smile. Elena read the card. "Thank you for the best dinner conversation I've had in years. S." Throughout her shift, Elena couldn't stop thinking about Sebastian and their kiss. It was madness. To think anything could come of this. They were from completely different worlds. Yet she couldn't deny the connection she felt with him. During her lunch break, she received a text from an unknown number. "Missing you already. Dinner again tonight?" Elena saved the number under Sebastian's name before replying, "Working late. Shift at diner, rain check." His response came immediately, "I'm not opposed to late-night dessert." Elena smiled despite herself. "You're persistent. Only about things that matter," he texted back. That evening at the diner, Elena kept glancing. At the door, half expecting Sebastian to appear as he had the night before, Lucy noticed her distraction. "Waiting for someone special?" she teased. "No," Elena lied, then sighed. "Maybe. I don't know. Honey, I've been around the block enough times to recognize that look. You've got it bad." "It's complicated," Elena said. Lucy patted her hand. "Love always is." "Who said anything about love?" Elena protested. "I barely know him." "Sometimes it doesn't take long to know," Lucy said wisely. At 10 minutes to 11, when Elena was finishing her shift, the door opened. Her heart leaped. But it wasn't Sebastian. Instead, a delivery man entered carrying a small bakery box. "Delivery for Elena Moore," he called out. Puzzled, Elena approached him. "That's me." The man handed her the box and left. Inside, she found a perfect slice of apple pie with a note. "Since I can't be there in person, I thought I'd send the second best thing. The meatloaf will have to wait for another day." Elena couldn't help but laugh. The man was impossible, impossibly thoughtful, impossibly charming, and impossibly out of her league. Yet somehow here she was, holding his pie and feeling like a teenager with her first crush. As she was leaving the diner, her phone rang with an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Is this Elena Moore?" A woman's crisp, professional voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Patricia Reynolds, Mr. Knight's executive assistant. Mr. Knight asked me to coordinate with you about your availability tomorrow evening." Elena frowned. "He has an assistant call for him now?" There was a pause. "Mr. Knight is currently in an emergency board meeting. He asked me to ensure you know he wishes to see you tomorrow, but he may be unavailable to contact you personally for several hours." Elena felt conflicted. On one hand, it was thoughtful of Sebastian to make sure she knew he was thinking of her. On the other hand, having his assistant call felt impersonal. "Please tell Mr. Knight that I appreciate the thought, but I prefer to make my own plans directly," Elena said finally. "I understand," Patricia replied, her tone neutral. "I'll pass along your message." After hanging up, Elena felt a twinge of regret. Had she overreacted? Maybe this was normal in Sebastian's world, but it wasn't normal in hers, and if they were going to continue, whatever this was, he needed to understand that. When she arrived home, her father was already asleep, his heart medication on the nightstand beside him. Elena checked to make sure he had taken the right dose, then quietly prepared for bed herself. Just as she was about to turn off her light, her phone buzzed with a text from Sebastian. "Board meeting from hell finally over. Just got Patricia's message." You're right. I should have called you myself. I apologize. Can I make it up to you tomorrow? Elena smiled at his humility. For a man used to having the world bend to his will, admitting a mistake wasn't easy. Apology accepted, she texted back. And yes to tomorrow, but I choose the place this time. His response was immediate. Name it. The community center where I volunteer. 5 p.m. Wear something casual, really casual. There was a longer pause before his reply. Intriguing. I'll be there. Elena set down her phone, wondering what Sebastian Knight would make of her world. The community center with its after-school programs and senior activities, the place where she felt most useful and fulfilled. It would be about as far from his corporate boardrooms and luxury restaurants as possible. As she drifted off to sleep, Elena couldn't help wondering where this unexpected relationship was heading. Her practical side warned that they were too different, that heartbreak was inevitable, but another part of her, a part she hadn't listened to in a long time, whispered that maybe, just maybe, their collision had been fate. The last thing she thought before sleep claimed her was the feeling of Sebastian's lips on hers, and the way he had looked at her, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. For that moment at least, their different worlds hadn't seemed to matter at all. Elena arrived at the community center early the next day, feeling unusually nervous. The worn brick building with its faded sign had always been a place of comfort for her, but today she saw it through fresh eyes, Sebastian's eyes, and wondered if she was making a mistake bringing him here. Mrs. Geller, the elderly director, greeted her with a warm hug. Elena, dear, I thought you weren't volunteering until Saturday. I'm not, Mrs. Geller. I'm actually bringing someone to see the center today. Mrs. Geller's eyes twinkled. A special someone? Elena blushed. Just a friend who's interested in what we do here. Well, any friend of yours is welcome here, Mrs. Geller said, patting Elena's hand. At exactly 5 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled up outside. Elena watched from the window as Sebastian stepped out, and she couldn't help but smile. He had followed her instructions, sort of. He wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, but even in casual clothes, everything about him screamed money. And privilege. The jeans probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. Still, he had tried, and that meant something. So this is your world, Sebastian said when she met him at the door, looking around with genuine interest. Part of it, Elena replied. Come on, I'll show you around. As they walked through the center, Elena explained the various programs. After school, tutoring for disadvantaged kids, English classes for immigrants, a food pantry for families in need, and social activities for seniors. I mainly help with the senior program and the children's reading group, she told him. When I have time. Sebastian watched as she greeted everyone by name. The janitor mopping the hallway, the teenagers in the computer room, the elderly women in the craft circle. Everyone clearly adored her. Miss Elena, a small voice called out as they passed the moire. Children's library. A girl of about 7 with braided hair ran up to them. Are you reading to us today? Elena knelt down to the child's level. Not today, Zoe. This is my friend Sebastian. Sebastian, this is Zoe, one of our best readers. Zoe looked up at Sebastian with wide eyes. You're really tall. Sebastian smiled and knelt down as well. And you're really good at making observations. Elena tells me you like to read. What's your favorite book? Charlotte's Web, Zoe answered promptly. It's about a spider who saves a pig. That's a great choice, Sebastian said seriously. Friendship and loyalty are important, don't you think? Zoe nodded solemnly. Ms. Elena says books teach us how to be good people. Ms. Elena is very wise, Sebastian said, catching Elena's eye. With a warm glance that made her heart flutter. After Zoe ran off to join the other children, Sebastian stood, looking thoughtful. You're amazing with them. They're easy to be amazing with, Elena said. Kids just want to be seen and heard, like most people, I guess. As they continued their tour, they reached the senior activities room, where a gray-haired man was struggling to set up a projector for movie night. Need help, Mr. Collins? Elena asked, immediately moving to assist him. This newfangled thing won't connect to the computer, Mr. Collins grumbled. Sebastian stepped forward. May I? He asked politely. Within minutes, Sebastian had the projector working perfectly and had even improved the sound system with a few adjustments. "You're a miracle worker, young man," Mr. Collins declared. "Are you Elena's boyfriend?" "Mr. Collins." Elena protested, her cheeks flaming. Sebastian just smiled. "I'm a friend who's hoping to become more than a friend," he answered honestly, making Elena's blush deepen. "Well, don't wait too long," Mr. Collins advised. "Good women like her don't come along every day." "Believe me, I know," Sebastian replied, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. Later, as they sat in the small community garden behind the center, Elena asked, "So, what do you think of my world?" Sebastian looked around at the modest surroundings, the small vegetable plots tended by neighborhood families, the weathered benches, the handmade mosaic pathway created by the children's art class. "I think it's rich in ways my world often isn't," he said finally. "These people have real connections. They know each other's names, their stories. In my circles, people network instead of connect." "But you have resources we could only dream of," Elena pointed out. "Do you know what we could do with even a fraction of what your car cost?" Sebastian turned to her. "What would you do? If money wasn't an issue, what would this place need most?" Elena thought for a moment. "The roof leaks when it rains hard. The heating system is ancient. The computer lab has machines from a decade ago." She sighed. "But mostly we need more staff. The volunteers are wonderful, but there's only so much they can do." Sebastian nodded, taking in the information with a focused expression Elena had begun to recognize. His business face, the look he got when he was solving a problem. "Don't even think about it," she warned. "Think about what?" he asked innocently. "Swooping. In with your checkbook. These people have pride, Sebastian. They're not looking for charity." "What about investment?" Sebastian countered. "There's a difference." Before Elena could argue further, her phone rang. She frowned when she saw it was her father calling. "Dad? Is everything okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," her father replied, but his voice sounded strained. "Just a little discomfort, nothing to worry about." Elena knew her father well enough to hear the pain he was trying to hide. "I'm coming home right now," she said firmly. "There's no need. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Elena insisted, already gathering her things. "Have you taken your medication?" "Yes. But no buts, I'm on my way." She hung up and turned to Sebastian. "I'm sorry, I have to go. My dad's not feeling well." "I'll drive you," Sebastian said immediately, no questions asked. On the way to her apartment, Elena explained her father's heart condition. "He had a minor heart attack last year. The doctors say he needs a special procedure, but our insurance won't cover it all, and we can't afford the rest." She twisted her hands anxiously. "He downplays how bad he feels because he doesn't want me to worry, but that just makes me worry more." When they arrived at the apartment, Elena rushed inside with Sebastian following. She found her father sitting in his recliner, his face pale and clammy. "Dad!" Elena knelt beside him, taking his wrist to check his pulse. "How long have you been feeling like this?" "Just an hour or so," her father said weakly. "I thought it would pass." Sebastian stood in the doorway, watching with concern. "Should I call an ambulance?" Elena hesitated, knowing an ambulance ride would be another bill they couldn't afford. Reading her expression, Sebastian pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my personal physician. He makes house calls." Before Elena could protest, Sebastian stepped into the hallway to make the call. She turned her attention back to her father, helping him take his medication and loosening his collar. "Who's your friend?" her father asked, trying to distract himself from the pain. "That's Sebastian," Elena said. "The one I told you about." Her father managed a small smile. "The car guy. He seems nice." "He is," Elena admitted. "Different than I expected." 20 minutes later, a distinguished grey-haired man arrived with a medical bag. Dr. Henderson introduced himself as Sebastian's family physician and promptly began examining Mr. Moore. "How long have you been experiencing these symptoms?" Dr. Henderson asked, listening to Mr. Moore's heart. "The pain comes and goes," Mr. Moore admitted. "Been getting worse these past few months." Dr. Henderson frowned. "You need proper treatment, Mr. Moore. This condition won't improve on its own." "We've seen specialists," Elena explained. "But the Procedure he needs. I understand, Dr. Henderson said kindly. For now, I'm adjusting his medication. This should help with the immediate discomfort. But he really needs to be seen at the hospital for a full workup. After Dr. Henderson left, promising to return the next day, Elena found Sebastian in the small kitchen making tea. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Do what? Call my doctor? Make tea? Both seemed like the obvious things to do. Sebastian handed her a steaming mug. Elena took the tea gratefully. Thank you, not just for the tea, but for everything today. Sebastian shrugged. Anyone would have done the same. No, Elena contradicted him. They wouldn't. Most people would have been uncomfortable seeing someone sick, would have made excuses to leave. I'm not most people, Sebastian said simply. Elena studied him over the rim of her mug. No, you're not. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Sebastian spoke again. Your father needs that procedure. Yes, he does, Elena agreed, her voice tight. And when I win the lottery, he'll get it. Elena, don't, she cut him off. Don't offer to pay for it, please. Sebastian looked at her, puzzled. Why not? I have the money. It would be nothing to me and everything to him. To you. Because I can't start a relationship with someone who's also my father's financial savior, Elena explained. It creates an imbalance I can never overcome. Do you understand? Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. I do understand, he said finally, but I don't agree. If you had the means to help someone you cared about, wouldn't you do it without hesitation? That's different, is it? Sebastian challenged. Or is it just your pride? Elena felt tears threatening. Maybe it is pride, but it's also self-preservation. What happens when you get tired of me, Sebastian? When the novelty of dating someone who isn't impressed by your money wears off? You'll move on, but my father and I will always know we were your charity cases. Sebastian moved closer, taking her hands in his. First of all, I'm not going to get tired of you, and second, it wouldn't be charity. It would be a gift from someone who cares about you. Elena looked into his eyes and saw sincerity there, but she still shook her head. I can't. Not yet. Not until I know what this is between us. Sebastian nodded reluctantly. I respect that, but the offer stands. After checking that her father was resting comfortably, Elena walked Sebastian to the door. Will you be able to go to work tomorrow? He asked. I'll have to, Elena said. Bills don't pay themselves. Sebastian hesitated at the door. Let me stay, he said suddenly. I can work remotely in the morning, and that way you won't have to worry about leaving. Your father alone. Elena was taken aback by the offer. You'd do that? What about your meetings and whatever else billionaire CEOs do all day? They can manage without me for a few hours, Sebastian said with a smile. I'm the boss, remember? Against her better judgment, Elena found herself agreeing. Sebastian left briefly to retrieve his laptop from his car and to have his driver bring a few necessities from his home. That night, Elena made up the small couch for Sebastian. It was hardly the luxury accommodations he was used to, but he didn't complain. I've slept in worse places, he assured her. During my startup days, I sometimes crashed on the office floor to save time. As Elena prepared for bed, she peeked into the living room to see Sebastian working quietly on his laptop, the soft glow illuminating his face. Something warm unfurled in her chest at the sight of him there, this man from another world who somehow fit into her small apartment, her complicated life. The next morning, Elena woke early to find Sebastian already awake, making coffee in their tiny kitchen. He had somehow found ingredients she didn't even know she had, and was preparing breakfast. Good morning, he said, looking far too handsome for someone who had spent the night on a lumpy couch. How's your father? Still sleeping, Elena replied, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. You didn't have to make breakfast. I wanted to, Sebastian said simply. Though your kitchen is challenging. Elena laughed. Not equipped for gourmet cooking? Let's just say I've never had to be this creative with 2 eggs and half a loaf of bread. They ate breakfast together, talking quietly about nothing important, and Elena was struck by how comfortable it felt, as if they had known each other for years instead of days. After breakfast, Elena checked on her father, who was feeling much better. "The new medication seems to be working," he told her. "Still, I don't want to leave you alone today," Elena worried. "I'll be right here," Sebastian called from the living room where he had set up his makeshift office. "Go to work, Elena. Your father and I will be fine." Elena looked between the two men dubiously. "You two barely know each other." "We'll get acquainted," her father said with a wink. "I want to hear how he ended up in my daughter's life." "Oh no," Elena groaned. "Dad, please don't tell embarrassing stories about me." "Only the good ones," her father promised, his eyes twinkling. Reluctantly, Elena left for her shift at the clinic, feeling strangely as if she were leaving behind her family, not her father and a man she'd known less than a week. Throughout the morning, she received texts from Sebastian, a picture of her father smiling over a chessboard, a message saying they'd had a good talk, an update that Dr. Henderson had visited again and was pleased with her father's improvement. During her lunch break, Elena called home to check in. "How's it going?" she asked Sebastian. "Your father is a remarkable man," Sebastian replied. "He's been telling me about his days working at the factory, how he put you through school on his own after your mother died." Elena felt a pang of emotion. "He worked so hard for me. He deserves better than this." "He's proud of you," Sebastian said softly. "That's all that matters to him." When Elena returned home that evening, she found a surprising scene. Sebastian and her father laughing together like old friends as they watched a baseball game on TV. "There she is," her father called cheerfully. "Sebastian and I were just debating whether the Dodgers have a chance this season." "Were you now?" Elena replied, amazed at how healthy her father looked compared to the previous day. "Your boyfriend thinks they're a sure thing," her father said, using the term boyfriend so casually that Elena didn't even think to correct him. "Is that right?" she asked, raising an eyebrow at Sebastian. "What can I say?" "I'm an optimist," Sebastian replied with a grin. That evening they ordered takeout. Sebastian insisted on paying and ate together in the small living room, talking and laughing as if they'd been doing this for years. Elena watched Sebastian with her father, noting how attentive he was, how he listened to her father's stories with genuine interest. This wasn't the calculating businessman she'd expected when she first recognized him after their accident. This was someone else, entirely, warm, compassionate, and surprisingly down-to-earth despite his wealth. After dinner, her father announced he was tired and retreated to his bedroom, leaving Elena and Sebastian alone. "Thank you," Elena said, sitting beside Sebastian on the couch. "For today, for yesterday, for everything." "You don't need to thank me," Sebastian replied, taking her hand. "I wanted to be here." "Why?" Elena asked, the question that had been on her mind since the beginning. "Why me, Sebastian?" "You could be with anyone, models, actresses, women from your world who understand your life." Sebastian was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "When I was building my company, I had nothing but a good idea and determination. People looked at me and saw potential, maybe, but not success. Not yet." He squeezed her hand. "You look at me and see the man, not the bank account. Do you know how rare that is? I see a man who's kind to sick old men and makes friends with little girls at community centers," Elena said softly. "A man who sleeps on uncomfortable couches and doesn't complain." Sebastian leaned closer. "And I see a woman who works harder than anyone I know, who puts everyone else first, who makes me want to be worthy of her attention." The air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Sebastian's hand came up to cup her cheek, and Elena leaned into his touch. "I'm falling for you, Elena Moore," he whispered. "Completely and utterly falling for you." Elena's heart raced. "This is happening so fast," she murmured, even as she moved closer to him. "Sometimes you just know," Sebastian replied before closing the distance between them. Their kiss was deeper, more passionate than their first. Elena felt herself getting lost in the sensation, in the rightness of being in his arms. For once, she didn't think about their differences or the complications. She simply felt. When they finally parted, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me tomorrow night," he said. "Let me show you my world, the way you've shown me yours." Elena hesitated. "What about my father?" "Dr. Henderson can arrange a night nurse," Sebastian suggested. "Just one night. Let me take you away from all this just for a few hours. Looking into his eyes, Elena found she couldn't refuse. Okay, she agreed. One night. The next evening, after ensuring her father was comfortable with the professional nurse Sebastian had arranged, Elena found herself being driven to Sebastian's penthouse in the most exclusive building in the city. "Home sweet home," Sebastian said as they entered, watching her reaction carefully. Elena tried not to gape as she took in the vast open space with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Everything was sleek, modern, and obviously expensive, a complete contrast to her small, cramped apartment. "It's big," she managed. Sebastian laughed. "And cold, I know. I'm rarely here except to sleep, honestly." As he gave her a tour, Elena noticed there were few personal touches. No family photos, no mementos, nothing that really said Sebastian except for a small collection of antique chess pieces on a shelf. "Do you play?" she asked, touching one. "Of the pieces. My grandfather taught me," Sebastian explained. "He was the only one who encouraged me to follow my own path, not my father's. These were his." Elena smiled, touched by this glimpse into his past. "So there is sentiment beneath that business exterior." "More than you might think," Sebastian replied softly. He had arranged for dinner to be served on his terrace, with the city lights spread out below them like stars. The food was exquisite, the wine perfectly paired, and yet Elena found herself missing the simple intimacy of her own kitchen. "You don't like it," Sebastian observed, noticing her quietness. "It's beautiful," Elena assured him. "Overwhelming, but beautiful. But it's not you," Sebastian guessed accurately. Elena sighed. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life. This world, your world, it's so different from mine." Sebastian reached across the table for her hand. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe we need what the other has." "What could I possibly have that you need?" Elena asked skeptically. "Groundedness, purpose, connection," Sebastian replied without hesitation. "My life is full of things, Elena, but empty of meaning, until you crashed into it." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep inside her. For the first time, Elena allowed herself to believe that perhaps this wasn't just a fleeting interest for him, that perhaps Sebastian Knight really did need her as much as she was beginning to need him. After dinner, they stood together. On the terrace, Sebastian's arms wrapped around her from behind as they looked out over the city. "Somewhere down there is where we met," he murmured against her hair. "One random rainy day that changed everything." Elena leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength of his chest. "Do you ever think about how unlikely it all is? If I hadn't been running late if you had left 5 minutes earlier. I think some people are meant to find each other," Sebastian said. "One way or another." Elena turned in his arms to face him. "The businessman billionaire believes in fate. I believe in you," Sebastian replied simply. "Everything else is just details." When Sebastian kissed her this time, Elena didn't hold back. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing herself against him, letting herself believe, just for tonight, that they could bridge the gap between their worlds. Later, as they lay together in Sebastian's massive bed, Elena traced patterns on his chest, thinking about how quickly her life had changed. "Penny for your thoughts," Sebastian said, playing with a strand of her hair. "I was just thinking how surreal this is," Elena admitted. "A week ago, I was just trying to get through each day. And now, Sebastian prompted. Elena looked up at him. "Now I'm afraid to get too used to this, to you. I'm afraid of what happens when real life intrudes again." Sebastian propped himself up on one elbow. "This is real life, Elena. Different from what you're used to, maybe, but just as real. Your board members and business partners aren't going to understand why you're with someone like me," Elena pointed out. "They don't need to understand," Sebastian said firmly. "My personal life is my own." "Is it, though?" Elena challenged. "I've seen how people look at you in public, how the waiters and maitre d's treat you differently. You're not just a person, Sebastian. You're Sebastian Knight." Sebastian was quiet for a moment. "Would it be easier if I wasn't? If I was just a regular guy with a regular job?" "Maybe," Elena admitted. "But then you wouldn't be you." Sebastian pulled her closer. Give us a chance, Elena, that's all I'm asking. Let's figure this out together. Elena wanted to believe it could be that simple, but as she drifted off to sleep in Sebastian's arms, a nagging worry remained. In the light of day, would their differences still seem surmountable, or would they prove too great to overcome? The answer came sooner than she expected. The next morning, Elena woke to the sound of Sebastian on the phone, his voice sharp with authority as he dealt with some business crisis. This was a side of him she hadn't seen before. The commanding CEO who expected immediate results. "I don't care what it takes," he was saying. "Buy them out if necessary, but get it done today." When he hung up, Sebastian noticed her watching him. His expression immediately softened. "Sorry about that," he said, rejoining her in bed. "Work never really stops." "Is everything okay?" Elena asked. "Just a competitor trying to poach one of our acquisitions," Sebastian explained. "Nothing unusual in my world." "Your world," Elena repeated, the phrase highlighting their differences once again. Before Sebastian could respond, his phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and frowned. "What is it?" Elena asked. "Nothing important," Sebastian said, setting the phone aside. But Elena had caught a glimpse of the name on the screen, Olivia Blackwell. The name was familiar. Elena had seen it in magazine articles about Sebastian. Olivia was his ex-girlfriend, a socialite from one of the city's wealthiest families. "You should take it if it's important," Elena said carefully. Sebastian shook his head. "It's not." He leaned in to kiss her, but the mood had shifted. Later, as they had breakfast, Sebastian's phone kept buzzing with calls and messages. He ignored most of them, trying to focus on Elena, but she could see his attention was divided. "Go ahead," she said finally. "Deal with whatever needs dealing with. I should get back to my father anyway." "Are you sure?" Sebastian asked clearly, torn. "I'm sure," Elena said, forcing a smile. "This is your life." "Sebastian, I understand." As his driver took her home, Elena stared out the window, thinking about the differences that seemed so much more apparent in the harsh light of morning. Sebastian lived in a world of high-stakes business deals and socialite ex-girlfriends. She lived in a world of community centers and double shifts. Could those worlds really coexist? Or was she setting herself up for heartbreak by believing they could? When she arrived home, Elena found her father looking remarkably better. The night nurse gave her a positive report before leaving. "So," her father said once they were alone, "how was your night with Prince Charming?" Elena sighed, sinking onto the couch. "Complicated." Her father studied her face. "Having second thoughts?" "Maybe," Elena admitted. "His world is so different from ours, Dad. This morning I watched him making million-dollar decisions over the phone like it was nothing. Meanwhile, I'm worrying about how to pay the electric bill next month." "Love doesn't care about bank accounts," her father said gently. "Who said anything?" "About love?" Elena protested, though her racing heart told a different story. "Your face says it every time you mention his name," her father replied with a knowing smile. Before Elena could respond, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found a delivery man holding an enormous bouquet of roses. "Eleanor Moore?" the man asked. "That's me," Elena confirmed, accepting the flowers. The card read simply, "Missing you already. Dinner tonight?" Despite her doubts, Elena couldn't help but smile. Maybe they were from different worlds. Maybe the odds were against them. But for now, she would follow her heart and see where this unexpected journey would take her. What she didn't know was that across town, Sebastian was facing his own challenges. As he ended his conference call, his assistant Patricia entered his office with a concerned expression. "Sir, Ms. Blackwell is here to see you. She's quite insistent." Sebastian frowned. "Tell her I'm busy." "I already tried," Patricia said apologetically. "She says it's about the merger with her father's company, and she mentioned she'd seen the photos." "What photos?" Sebastian asked, suddenly alert. Before Patricia could answer, the door opened and Olivia Blackwell strode in, tall, elegant, and clearly angry. "Really, Sebastian?" she demanded, tossing a tabloid magazine onto his desk. "A waitress?" Sebastian glanced down at the magazine and felt his blood run cold. There, on the front page, was a photo of him and Elena kissing outside her apartment building. The headline read, "Billionaire bachelor's new flame waitress with a past." "What is this?" he demanded. "That's what I'd like to know," Olivia said coldly. "My father is reconsidering our company's merger because his potential business partner is apparently slumming it with the help." Sebastian stood, his expression hardening. "Get out, Olivia." "The board won't like this, Sebastian," Olivia warned. "A scandal is the last thing Night Innovations needs right now." "My personal life is none of the board's business," Sebastian replied firmly. "Or yours." After Olivia left, Sebastian examined the magazine more closely. The article hinted at a troubled past for Elena, mentioning her dropping out of nursing school and her father's health problems, as if they were scandalous secrets. Sebastian immediately called his PR team and his lawyers. He needed to contain this before Elena saw it. The last thing he wanted was for her to be hurt by the ugliness of his world, a world where private moments became public fodder and relationships were judged by bank statements rather than feelings. As Sebastian worked to manage the situation, he realized with clarity what he had suspected for days. Elena Moore wasn't just a fascinating diversion or a refreshing change of pace. She was the woman he was falling in love with. And he would do whatever it took to protect her, even if it meant taking on the entire tabloid industry. What he didn't know was that across town, Elena's phone was already ringing, her co-worker from the diner calling to warn her about the photos that were spreading like wildfire across social media. The collision of their worlds had just become very public, and there would be no going back. Elena stared at her phone in disbelief as Lucy explained about the tabloid photos. "They're everywhere, honey," Lucy said, her voice sympathetic. "Someone must have tipped off the press about you and Sebastian Knight. This can't be happening," Elena whispered, sinking onto the couch. Her father looked at her with concern. "What is it?" he asked. Elena couldn't speak, so she handed him the phone. Lucy was still talking, mentioning social media links and comments appearing online. "I'll call you back," Elena told Lucy before hanging up. Her father scrolled through the photos that Lucy had sent. Elena and Sebastian outside her apartment, at the cafe, even getting into his car after dinner. The headlines were cruel. "Billionaires. Charity case and gold digger lands night fortune." "These vultures," her father muttered, handing the phone back. Elena's phone started ringing again, an unknown number this time. She rejected the call only for it to ring again immediately with another unknown number. "They're getting my number somehow," she realized. "How is this happening?" Her father reached over to squeeze her hand. "It's the price of being involved. With someone famous." "I never asked for this," Elena said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted any of it." As if on cue, her phone lit up with a text from Sebastian. "Elena, I just found out about the tabloids. Stay where you are, I'm on my way." Elena read the message but didn't respond. Her mind was reeling. How could she have been so naive? Of course this would happen. People like Sebastian didn't just date ordinary women without consequences. Before long, there was a knock at the door. Elena's father went to answer it. Sebastian stood there looking harried and concerned. "Is she okay?" he asked immediately. "Why don't you ask her yourself?" Her father stepped aside to let Sebastian in. Sebastian crossed the room to Elena, who remained seated on the couch, her expression unreadable. "Elena, I'm so sorry," Sebastian said, kneeling in front of her. "I should have anticipated this. My PR team is already working to shut it down." "Shut what down?" Elena asked quietly. "The truth, we are dating. I'm a waitress. You are a billionaire." "The way they're portraying it," Sebastian explained, running a hand through his hair. "They're making it seem tawdry, like you're after my money or I don't know, slumming it." Elena flinched at the words. "Aren't those the same doubts I had from the beginning, that this can't work because we're too different?" Sebastian took her hands in his. "No, don't let them get in your head. What we have is real." Elena pulled her hands away. "Look at this," she said, showing him her phone screen where dozens of notifications were pouring in. Friend requests, message requests, even comments on her old social media posts from years ago. "They're digging through my entire life." Sebastian's expression darkened. "I'll have my security team handle this. They can lock down your accounts, change your number." Don't you see? Elena interrupted. This is exactly what I was afraid. Say, if your solution to everything is to throw money and resources at it. But you can't buy privacy once it's gone. You can't buy back normalcy. Then what do you want me to do? Sebastian asked, frustration creeping into his voice. Just let them harass you. Elena stood up, needing space. She paused, tears threatening. I want to go back to a week ago, before all this started. Sebastian looked stricken. Before we met. Before our worlds collided, Elena clarified. Before I started believing this could actually work. It can work, Sebastian insisted, standing to face her. Don't let some tabloid garbage convince you otherwise. Elena's father cleared his throat. I'll give you two some privacy, he said, heading to his bedroom. Once they were alone, Sebastian tried again. Elena, please, let me fix this. That's just it, Elena said sadly. You always want to fix things. My father's health, the community center, and now this. But some things can't be fixed with money or power. This isn't about money, Sebastian argued. This is about us. Is it? Elena challenged. Because from where I'm standing, every problem we've faced comes back to the same thing. You live in a world I don't belong in, and I live in a world you visit like it's a tourist attraction. The words hung between them, harsh but true. Sebastian sat down heavily on the couch. So that's it, he asked quietly. You're giving up on us because some photographers took a few pictures? Elena sat beside him, leaving space between them. It's not just the pictures, Sebastian. It's what they represent, the reality check I needed. She took a deep breath. I let myself get caught up in a fantasy that someone like you could truly fit into my life, or that I could fit into yours. It wasn't a fantasy, Sebastian said, his voice thick with emotion. What I feel for you is the most real thing in my life. I believe you, Elena said gently. But feelings aren't always enough. Sometimes timing and circumstances matter too. Sebastian stood suddenly, pacing the small living room. No, I'm not accepting this. I don't accept that we should give up because it's difficult. Sebastian, do you think I built my company by giving up when things got tough? He continued. Do you think you got through nursing school and supported your father by quitting when challenges arose? Elena watched him, surprised by his intensity. The Elena Moore I know doesn't back down from a fight, Sebastian said. The woman who crashed into my car and then stood her ground. That woman doesn't run away when things get complicated. Despite herself, Elena felt a spark of the same fire that had drawn her to Sebastian in the first place. This isn't a business deal, she reminded him. No, it's more important than that. Sebastian knelt in front of her again. Elena, I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling the moment you looked me in the eye and refused to be intimidated by me. Elena's breath caught. It was the first time either of them had used the word love. I'm not saying it will be easy, Sebastian continued, but I am saying you're worth fighting for. We're worth fighting for. Before Elena could respond, her phone rang again. This time it was the clinic where she worked mornings. Hello, she answered tentatively. Elena, it's Dr. Williams, her boss said, his voice formal. I need to speak with you about your position here. Elena's stomach dropped. What about my position? We've been receiving calls from reporters, Dr. Williams explained. The clinic can't afford this kind of attention. Our patients deserve privacy. Are you firing me? Elena asked bluntly. There was a pause. We think it would be best if you took a leave of absence until this situation resolves itself. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the world collapsing around her. I see. After hanging up, she looked at Sebastian, who had clearly overheard the conversation. They're putting me on leave, she said flatly. I'm losing my job. Because of this, Sebastian's jaw tightened. I'll talk to them. No, Elena exclaimed. That will only make it worse. She buried her face in her hands. This is exactly what I was afraid of. My real life is falling apart because of whatever this is between us. I'll make it right, Sebastian promised. Just give me a chance. Elena looked up at him, tears in her eyes. How, Sebastian? How can you make this right without using your money or your influence? because those are exactly the things creating this imbalance between us." Sebastian opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, realizing he had no answer. His resources had always been his solution to problems, but now they were the problem itself. "I need time," Elena said finally. "Time to think, to figure out what to do." "Let me stay," Sebastian pleaded. "Let me help." Elena shook her head. "No, I need space, please." The pain in her eyes was more than Sebastian could bear. He nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but this isn't over, Elena. I'm not giving up on us." After Sebastian left, Elena sank back onto the couch, emotionally exhausted. Her father emerged from his room, concern written on his face. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked, sitting beside her. "No," Elena admitted. "I just lost my job at the clinic, and possibly the best man I've ever met." Her father was quiet for a moment. "You know, when your mother and I got together, her family didn't approve," he said finally. "They thought she could do better than a factory worker." Elena looked at him in surprise. "You never told me that." "It wasn't relevant until now." He patted her hand. "They thought our differences would tear us apart. But you know what? Those differences made us stronger. Your mother taught me to appreciate art and literature. I taught her how to change a tire and fix a leaking faucet." "That's different," Elena protested. "You weren't dealing with tabloids and multi-million-dollar business deals. The scale is different," her father conceded. "But the principle is the same. Love isn't about being the same. It's about complementing each other's strengths and weaknesses." Elena leaned against her father's shoulder. "I'm scared, Dad. Scared that I'll lose myself in his world, or that he'll get tired of mine." "That's a risk with any relationship," her father said wisely. "But from what I've seen, that young man cares deeply for you. Not for what you can give him or what you represent, for you." Elena thought about Sebastian's words. "I'm falling in love with you." Could she really walk away from that because she was scared, because it was difficult? The next morning, Elena awoke to multiple missed calls from the diner. With a sense of dread, she called Lucy back. "Elena, thank goodness," Lucy said when she answered. "Have you seen what's happening?" "Please don't tell me I'm fired from the diner too," Elena groaned. "Fired? Honey, we're booked solid," Lucy exclaimed. "People are lining up to eat where Sebastian Knight's girlfriend works. It's crazy." Elena sat up straight. "What?" "There was an interview in the morning news," Lucy explained excitedly. "Sebastian Knight himself, talking about how he met this amazing woman after a car accident, and how she changed his perspective on everything. He mentioned our meatloaf, Elena, said it was the best he'd ever had." Elena scrambled to find her laptop, pulling up the news site. There was Sebastian, looking poised and confident in a television interview. "Yes, Elena and I met after a minor car accident," he was saying to the interviewer. "But that fender bender turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me." "And the rumors that she's after your fortune?" the interviewer asked. Sebastian's expression hardened slightly. "Anyone who knows Elena would find that laughable. She's the most genuine, hard-working person I've ever met. In fact, she refused my offer to help with her father's medical bills because she didn't want our relationship to be about money." The interviewer looked surprised. "That's unusual in your world, isn't it?" "It is," Sebastian agreed, "which is exactly why I'm not letting her go without a fight. To be clear, I'm the lucky one in this relationship." As the interview continued, Sebastian spoke about the community center where Elena volunteered, highlighting the important work they did with limited resources. "In fact," he said, "I'm launching a new foundation focused on supporting community initiatives like the one where Elena volunteers. Not because of Elena, but because she helped me see the importance of these grassroots organizations." Elena watched, speechless, as Sebastian effectively turned the narrative completely around. He wasn't hiding their relationship or downplaying their differences. He was celebrating them. By the time Sebastian mentioned that he would be serving as a guest waiter at the Golden Spoon Diner that weekend, with all proceeds going to heart disease research, Elena was laughing through her tears. Her phone rang. It was Dr. Williams from the clinic. "Elena," he said, sounding much warmer than the day before, "I think we may have been hasty yesterday. We'd like you to return to work whenever you're ready." "Really?" Elena asked skeptically. "What changed?" "Well," Dr. Williams hesitated, Mr. Knight called this morning. He was quite persuasive about your value to the clinic. Elena frowned. What did he offer you? It's not what you think, Dr. Williams said quickly. He simply pointed out that having an employee connected to his new community health initiative could be beneficial for everyone involved. No money changed hands, I assure you. After hanging up, Elena sat back trying to process everything. Sebastian had found a way to use his influence not to override her independence, but to create opportunities that benefited the things she cared about. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sebastian. Have you seen the news? I'm officially the world's worst waiter in training. Lucy says I need to work on my coffee pouring technique. Despite herself, Elena smiled. She could picture Sebastian at the diner, probably wearing clothes that cost more than the building itself, earnestly trying to learn how to wait tables. Another text came through. I meant what I said in that interview, every word. Ball's in your court. Now, Elena. Elena hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Did she have the courage to take this leap, to believe that they could build something real despite their differences? Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found not Sebastian, but Patricia, his assistant. Ms. Moore, Patricia said formally. Mr. Knight asked me to deliver this to you personally. She handed Elena a simple white envelope and left quickly. Inside, Elena found a handwritten letter. Elena, it began. I've been thinking about what you said about fixing things with money and influence. You were right. That's been my approach to life for so long that I forgot there are problems money can't solve and relationships that shouldn't be about financial rescue. But here's what I realized. Just as you don't want me to fix your life with my resources, I don't want you to diminish what we have because of them either. My wealth is part of who I am, just as your compassion and work ethic are part of you. I don't want to change you, Elena. I fell for the woman who stands her ground, who challenges me, who sees beyond the bank account to the person I really am. All I'm asking is that you do the same. See past the trappings of my life to the man who is hopelessly in love with you. I'll be at the community center at 7 p.m. tonight. If you're willing to give us a real chance, not as a billionaire and a waitress, but as Sebastian and Elena, meet me there. Either way, the foundation for the center is already established. That's not conditional on us. It's simply the right thing to do, and I thank you for helping me see that. All my love, Sebastian. Elena read the letter twice, her heart pounding. He had found the perfect balance, using his resources for good, without making her the recipient of his charity, respecting her independence while still being true to himself. That evening, Elena arrived at the community center at exactly 7 p.m. The building was unusually quiet. No children's voices, no seniors chatting in the recreation room. She found Sebastian waiting in the garden, sitting on one of the weathered benches where they had talked just days ago. When he saw her, he stood, his expression a mixture of hope and nervousness. You came, he said simply. I came, Elena confirmed, stepping closer. Your letter was persuasive, Sebastian smiled. I meant every word. I know. Elena took a deep breath. I've been thinking too, about us, about all the reasons this shouldn't work. Sebastian's smile faltered. And then I realized something, Elena continued. All those reasons, our different backgrounds, lifestyles, resources, they're just circumstances. They're not who we are. Hope returned to Sebastian's eyes. That's what I've been trying to say. I know that now. Elena moved closer still. I was so afraid of losing myself in your world that I almost lost something even more important. What's that? Sebastian asked softly. The chance to love and be loved for exactly who I am. Elena reached for his hand. I'm falling in love with you too, Sebastian. Not the billionaire CEO, but the man who makes my father laugh, who connects with children at the community center, who learns to pour coffee just to understand my world better. Sebastian pulled her close. So we're doing this? Really doing this? It won't be easy, Elena warned. There will still be tabloids and differences and complications. I don't want easy, Sebastian said, his eyes serious. I want you. Everything else we'll figure out together. As he leaned down to kiss her, Elena realized that sometimes the most unexpected collisions lead to the most perfect journeys. Their worlds might be different, but their hearts had found their match, and that was worth fighting for. 6 months. Later, the Golden Spoon Diner was closed for a private event. The tables had been rearranged, and fairy lights twinkled overhead. Elena's father, looking healthier than he had in years since his successful surgery, chatted with Sebastian's business partner while Lucy supervised the food service. Children. From the community center, now renamed the Moore Community Center after Elena's mother, played in the corner under Mrs. Geller's watchful eye. The center had been completely renovated, with new computers, a fixed roof, and expanded programs for the neighborhood. Elena adjusted her simple white dress as she watched Sebastian across the room. He caught her eye and smiled, excusing himself from a conversation with Dr. Henderson to join her. "Having second thoughts?" he teased, wrapping his arm around her waist. "About marrying you?" "Never," Elena replied, leaning into him. "About having our engagement party in the diner where I used to work. Maybe a few." Sebastian laughed. "It's perfect. This is where it all started, where I fell for a waitress who wasn't impressed by my car or my money." "I was a little impressed by the car," Elena admitted with a smile. "I knew it," Sebastian said, triumphantly. As they looked around at their friends and family, from both their worlds now gradually merging into one, Elena marveled at how far they had come. There had been challenges, certainly. The tabloids still occasionally ran stories about them. Sebastian's board had needed convincing, and Elena had struggled to find her place in his world while maintaining her identity. But they had faced each challenge together, learning and growing stronger as a couple. Elena had returned to nursing school, now determined to finish her degree and work in community health. Sebastian had restructured his company to focus more on social impact alongside profit, inspired by Elena's perspective. "I'm glad I crashed." "Into your car," Elena said suddenly. Sebastian pulled her closer. "Best accident of my life. Who would have thought a fender bender could lead to this?" Elena gestured to the room full of people celebrating their engagement. "I did," Sebastian said confidently. "From the moment you offered to buy me coffee instead of paying for the damage, I knew you were someone special." "Liar," Elena laughed. "You were annoyed until you saw how pretty I was." "That might have helped," Sebastian admitted with a grin, "but it was your spirit that kept me coming back." As they mingled with their guests, Elena caught sight of her father watching them with a satisfied smile. He had been right all along. Their differences hadn't torn them apart. Instead, they had complemented each other, each bringing something valuable to the relationship. Later that night, after the party had ended and they were alone in Sebastian's penthouse, soon to be their penthouse once they were married, Elena stood on the terrace looking out at the city lights. "Penny for your thoughts," Sebastian said, joining her with 2 glasses of champagne. "I was just thinking about fate," Elena replied, accepting a glass. "How one rainy day changed everything." "Not fate," Sebastian corrected. "Choice. We chose each other, Elena. Every day since that accident, we've chosen to make this work, to bridge our differences, to build something real." Elena smiled up at him. "You're right, and I choose you again tomorrow, and the next day, and every day after that. Even when I'm being an arrogant CEO?" Sebastian asked with a raised eyebrow. "Even then," Elena promised. "As long as you choose me when I'm being a stubborn, prideful waitress." "Ex-waitress," Sebastian reminded her. "Soon to be nurse." "See? You're learning," Elena teased. As Sebastian pulled her into his arms for a kiss, the city lights twinkling around them like stars, Elena knew that their journey was just beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more differences to navigate, more collisions between their worlds. But some collisions weren't disasters. Some, like theirs, were the beginning of something beautiful, a love story that defied expectations and categories, that transcended wealth and status to find something genuine and true. Their love hadn't erased their differences. Instead, it had made those differences a strength, teaching them both that the most unexpected connections were often the most powerful. As Sebastian held her close under the night sky, Elena silently thanked that rainy day, that slippery road, that chance meeting that had changed everything. Their collision course had led them exactly where they were meant to be, together. The end.